Hello, our friends. Welcome back. I'm Zoe Coyle, and this is...
I'm Polly McGee.
Oh, did she just leave me hanging? I felt like that was quite a long wait. We are the co-pilots.
You always makes me say my full name.
Yeah, I do. Dr. Polly McGee. I'd have it all the way through. We're the co-pilots from Pilot Light, and we're very happy to see you and have you back if you listen to our other little video or podcast about vulnerability. Today, you obviously back because you know what we're talking about, and it is shame. Shame.
Now, let's just say it over and over and over again, because let's just burst the bubble. Shame, 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 shame. Shame. It's one of those words. Is it an onomatopoeia where the word sounds like it's the thing it is? Just saying shame makes it feel like someone's got a stick in your guts and they're stirring it up.
Yeah, totally. When Polly and I, and also just stay with us, because sometimes we're in rooms with people and they say, I don't feel shame. I don't really know what you're talking about. Yeah. Those that have had religious upbringings often say, oh yeah, I get what you're talking about.
They're straight on to shame. They're with us.
So, and in case you didn't catch our first video, this is what we're doing is from all the hundreds of people that Polly and I have facilitated with, we're collating the most commonly asked questions about various topics in the hope that it can be of service to you. And that's why we're marauding around here with shame. But one of the things that Polly and I found when we trained in this work is sitting in a room, just hearing people talk about shame for 3 days was pretty confronting. And I certainly didn't think that I had wells, deep reservoirs of shame within me until I navigated those days. We're not going to crack you apart today. We're just going to introduce you to the idea. So don't leave.
I feel like I've got those sort of Texan oil reservoirs of shame that like, dun, 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 dun. That's how I felt when we were in Texas, and that sort of like, oh, everything's fine. Then suddenly it's like, what's this black shit dripping all over me? Oh, it's shame.
Yeah. You know, I'm going to want you to talk about that if you can. Why don't we start with a definition? We'll talk about shame, guilt, embarrassment, and humiliation. We'll have a definition of those. And then I would love you to talk about your experience of shame, particularly because you've done so much work on yourself, Polly, and you're so self-aware. So that was a really interesting reckoning for you, wasn't it? About and one of the things Polly and I are deeply interested in is blind spots. Where do we hold our blind spots, and when are we ready to learn information about ourselves? Okay, so do you want to talk about the difference between embarrassment and humiliation, Paul?
I think it's good to break these down, because I think these four are often really clustered together. And those people, and I have to say in a gendered sense, the people that don't feel like they have shame are usually men. Yeah. And they kind of like, they get guilt and embarrassment. Is it guilt and embarrassment or humiliation and embarrassment you want me to talk about? Yeah,
well, why don't you do humiliation and embarrassment? Let's do the lighter ones first, and then we'll work our way into shame and guilt.
So embarrassment is hilariously the lightest one of all. And the thing for me that really marks embarrassment away from the other ones is there's a sense of humor to it. Embarrassment is that moment where you kind of know we're all in it together, because every one of us has spilled coffee down our blouse, or tripped over in the street, or taken a stack in Woolies, or dropped something in Woolies and just had the whole aisle filled with shoes. And people tend to lean into that, and they're like, oh, don't worry, I've done that a million times. You don't normally get hung out to dry in embarrassment. And it's just something about a kind of humorous humanity to it. I feel that, yes, you're going to blush, yes, you're going to have a little bit of a cringe, but it can often be a thing which actually really brings a group of people together in this shared moment of, oops. Humiliation is different, and humiliation has an edge of anger and rage to it, which I really like. Humiliation is the experience where we believe genuinely that we have been unfairly treated. We're humiliated. Again, we'll blush. So we're going to have the somatic responses. One thing I will say is shame, guilt, humiliation, embarrassment, they all have a very strong somatic response, and we'll get into that a bit more when Zoe.
And what does somatic response mean for people?
The somatic response means that you will have a physical reaction, and in every case, you will have that reaction before your mind kicks in and tells you what's happening. So you'll feel it in your body. But let's talk about that, because I think that's very relevant to shame and guilt. But for me, with humiliation, it's that sense of, how dare you? I don't deserve this. I was doing the best that I could. And you don't tend to take it on in a porous way. It doesn't lodge in the heart and in the cells in the same way that something like shame or guilt does. So embarrassment and humiliation are more points at which you can also almost come back to your own compass. I'm a good person, but like I fell over. I'm a good person and I didn't mean that to happen and I did my best. And humiliation is kind of thrust upon you. You don't sort of self-humiliate.
Mm.
Let's talk about your two.
It's
In the
the
division.
other thing about humiliation, the thing that made it really clear for me was that question of, did I deserve this?
Yeah. That's why I feel like it's imposed on you, not in a victim way. It's like humiliation comes from another. It doesn't it's very hard to self-humiliate.
I think I've managed it, but I think it is very hard.
You've always been an overachiever.
Yeah, I really am. I'm very advanced. Gifted. The other thing about embarrassment for me is that I'm happy to make eye contact with embarrassment.
Yeah.
Like when I tumble in the street, which is surprisingly often, seeing I'm an adult who often wears flat shoes, but I'm happy to look someone in the face and then I tend to roar with laughter. Whereas humiliation, I do tend to either want to use my eyes as a weapon or I need to shield down because I'm hot and I'm thinking. Okay, so let's talk about then, let's go. So those are the two lighter ones. And let's talk about guilt and shame. So shame is, I am bad. And guilt is, I did something bad. So shame is the self and guilt is behavioral. So say, for example, I arrived at a meeting and I arrived prepared to deliver the completely incorrect pitch. And Polly said to me, you know what, today we weren't discussing that. That's entirely the wrong client. If I had to experience guilt about that, I would say to Polly, I'm so sorry that I did that. I don't know how that happened. I'm going to clean it up. That behavior is unacceptable and I can't quite make sense of it, but I'll sort it. So I acknowledge that my behavior was the problem. Shame is where when Polly tells me that and I go into, oh my God, I am terrible and I am not equipped to do this work and I'm a fraud and they see through me and I don't know why I thought that who am I to even sit in this room? So there's the gradients there. Now, one of the things that Polly and I found really interesting teaching this work, because when we learned this work, we both had that experience of, gosh, that's much more active in our lives than we thought. And we'll go back to talking about the somatic thing, because I think that's really interesting to get that knowledge of, because your body will tell you first when you're in when that emotion hooks you. But what we found really interesting, and this is a bit gendered, is that quite a few men have come up to us and said, I get intellectually what you're talking about, but that's not my experience. Paul, could you talk about that engineer that came and talked to us about that recently?
I think there's a couple of good examples of that. And to say we were quite surprised when it started happening, because what we had trained in, basically the statistics and all of the data says that everyone experiences shame. It's a universalizing tool, which, like vulnerability, it's the perfect place to really start unpacking, because once you have a handle on those things in your life, it's really easy to sort of build everything else around it. But I think he was really interesting because he sort of had that, I don't really get it. Like, I hear what you're saying, but I don't think I've ever experienced it. And I kept saying to him, I want you to sort of stop thinking about this and start feeling it a bit more, because you'll know it because you know what it feels like. And we went through that sort of what the somatic signposts are, which, as Zoe said, we're going to get back to. And then he came up to me in the lunch break of the last workshop we had, and he said to me, oh, Polly, I just had a shame storm. And it was like, he was so excited because he's like, I get it. I said something and then I thought about what I'd said and I just started to go down and I could feel it in my body and I was self-hating. He's like, I just didn't know what that was called. And so I think it's one of those things where I would say, again, in a generalized and in a gendered way, shame is very alive for most women. If you think about the statistics on all kinds of abuse, sexualized violence, the predominance of the experience of women says that we experience shame very regularly and it's our fault. And that's a lot of the messaging we get from society. So most women are really down with this. That's not to say that we believe that or we don't actively push back against it, but we know what it feels like. Whereas for a lot of men, shame is not something they are. It's like when we talked in the first video about how, vulnerability is weakness. It's almost like shame sits in that bucket through. Shame is not a manly experience. So again, it's double down hidden for men, because they're experiencing it, they're not naming it, but they're having all of the symptoms.
Yeah, absolutely.
So will you talk about that experience of your client?
I will. And so we had another client, and I'm just going to park him for 1 second, just to say all of the things that the subjects that Polly and I are going to talk to you about are around hopefully increasing your awareness and asking you to bring a fresh light to them and re-explore concepts that, of course, you've held intellectually and, of course, you have opinions about. But this idea of shame is often so hidden from us that to drag it out into the light, it can be quite uncomfortable. And we'll also talk about why it's important to talk about it. But this chap, he was so interesting because he came up to us at a break, and it was at Sydney workshop, Polly, and he came up to us and said, I don't think I really do that. I go into blame quite a lot. So I'll go into this person is incompetent or that. And in another time, we'll talk about that idea of offloading hurt. And then we said, no, look, have a think. It's more personal than that. It sits in your body, but it is a process of thinking about yourself. And then he reached out to us some weeks after the workshop, and he said, oh, you're right. He said, I didn't think that was relevant for me. And he said, but it was with the onset of COVID, he had a big financial background, and he needed to determine whether or not he was going to sell the family stocks because he was losing money hand over fist. And he was in a place of atrophy and extreme acute self-judgment because he just did not know what the best course of action was for his family. You know, his history, his experience told him don't sell out at the bottom. But the other part of him was saying, I'm exposed, my family are exposed. And in that schism for him opened up deep wounding. And he plummeted into a place of shame, which is, I'm not the man that I wanted to be. I'm not the man that I'm pretending to be. I can't do this. I'm incapable of solving this. That is shame.
And I can't provide for my family, which is the primal wounding for masculinity of protection. And, you know, I think we often have the fissures, exactly what you're talking about, where it's a thing that has been in our family of origin, in our own sort of psychological experience, that is our particular shame thing. And it'll be individual for everyone, the thing that takes you into that well. And I think Zoe, he was an interesting case too, because he wasn't an unaware man. He'd done the work, he'd done a lot of therapy, he'd read a lot of books, and he was really open. Like he wanted to feel that, but he was just, I just don't know, maybe it's just not my thing.
That's right.
But it is everyone's thing.
It is everyone's thing. And then as women, what we see a lot in rooms is, and of course I'm making generalizations and collating these, but what we see a lot is women who are immediately clear which parent they never felt enough for. Which parent, you know, daddy or mummy, you know, we don't go, if I just do this, if I'm a perfectionist, if I'm a good girl, if I'm thinner, if I'm prettier, if I'm quieter, if I'm whatever it is, the enoughs that we're told all the time and we're not enough. I will be whole in the eyes of that person, and I will be loved, and I will be beloved, and then I will believe it myself. And we fall into this trap of believing that, and there is shame. There is the shame. And this idea that Polly referred to before, this amazing term, a shame storm. Have a think about that shame storm. Polly, can you talk about what a shame storm feels like to you? And let's go into that idea of the body.
And I also want to comment on what you were saying around that the being whole for the other person. The other great thing that sits in shame is a primal human need for connection. Our shame is about, I'm not enough, so I'm not going to be loved by these people. I'm not going to be in the tribe of these people, and I'm going to be thrown out in the wilderness. And in our very primal limbic brains, that just spells instant death. So we still carry these same motivations and these same hormonal responses. So we have to be enough for someone else so we don't get disavowed by the tribe. And I think that's where we know so much of this comes from ages 0 to 7, because that's where so many of these really basic primal wounds are made. And also in early teenage years, again, where there's a lot of brain development, a lot of hormonal development, and we make the neural pathways that connect, not enough, this activity, have to do better, or have to shut this down. So you'll see it generally has come from someone of influence, a parent, a teacher, a religious person, a peer of significance that you believe holds the keys to your connection and your survival. And so if you're looking for the trail of crumbs to find out where your shame sits. Think about moments where you have felt that shame, which is going to take me back into the shame spiral. So for me, the somatic response, which, as I said, like our bodies tell our brains what's going on. We think it's the other way around because we tend to think that everything follows our brain. It doesn't. It follows our body. So for me, I'll feel instantly in that sort of fainting tunnel vision, like everything's closing in. I start to shallow breathe, so I'm not getting any oxygen to my brain. So I'm like really, and my stomach's just in absolute knot. So it's kind of like I just shut down from throat and brain all the way down through into my gut. I'm a total instinct gut feeler. So for me, everything happens in my gut, but also the breathing. The breathing is so important. And the physical response can be a whole range of things. And when we do workshops about shame, we get people to stand up and point to on their body where they feel it. And we get a lot of prickling skin and intense stabbing pain in the head, and sometimes prickling armpits and all kinds of things, blurred vision, woo, woo, woo kind of sounds. You know, it goes on. So I encourage you to think for a minute, what does it feel like for you? And then you might, for the first time, go, oh, shame storm. The thing with shame and guilt as well is that for me, the definition is about, it's hard to recover from shame. With guilt's like a really good moral compass. It kind of gives you a light Parisian slap in the face that says, hey, you're better than this. Come on, like own this, say your piece, fix it up, and let's keep on rolling down the road. Shame is I'm better off dead. I may as well be in this hole. And it can be so all-encompassing, but it's not a place that's easy to get out from. And I think that's the thing that makes it so dangerous and so damaging. But there's an antidote.
There is. And we'll talk about that. So for me, shame sits in my heart very strongly. So my heart literally aches and I become incredibly hot. I blush. I'm incapable of hearing. I'm incapable of consolation. And it feels to me what I imagine a terrible death feels like. So that falling backwards, and I cannot see my way out, like being in the darkest well. It's horrifying. And what Polly and I have observed in the room is that even talking about these, as we've already flagged, shame and guilt, talking about it makes us feel uncomfortable. And so often we don't develop a curiosity around these states because it's even more uncomfortable to look at them. And when we feel them, we just want to get out of them or deny them or offload them as quickly as possible. And that brings us to a very important point of why we're talking about shame today. And that all of this is around an invitation, a gentle and loving and humble invitation. And as Polly said, we're doing this work too around knowing yourself. And if you are in denial of tracks of yourself, particularly the ugly and the painful, how can you take care of yourself, love yourself, and move forwards and be the best leader that you want to be and the best human being that you can be? And we really love the Joseph Campbell quote that the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. And for me, the gateway to the cave that I fear to enter is covered in shame, which is, Zoe, you're not enough. You know, you're just not enough and you're never going to be enough. But when I get my fingers in there, when I'm brave enough, and this comes back to that idea of courage, and when I'm vulnerable enough, when I go, you know what, I might fail here, but I'm going to get my fingers around the side of that and I'm going to move into it. Every time it has been my experience and Polly's experience and the people that are in our room, isn't it true, Polly, where that's where the riches are.
Yeah, that desire to get out of the discomfort, and we spoke a lot about this in our video on vulnerability. It's the same basic set of experiences. We don't want to be there because it doesn't feel great, but we're raised like infants on crack or Mountain Dew to want to feel pleasure all the time. This is the Western condition. We suffer and then we want more sweet, tasty things to make it go away. And the reality is that the suffering takes us to the sweet. There's a beautiful expression in Ayurveda, which is an Indian medicinal spiritual tradition, so thousands and thousands of years old. And it always says that the bitter comes before the sweet. And without having that experience of the bitter, you don't get to the sweet. But if you think about what happens when you have a big lump of sugar or some ice cream or literal sugar, there's a bitterness that comes that stays with you for a long time. So for me, the experience of this is to get out of a binary of good and bad with it, that going into the cave we fear to enter, or sitting in the discomfort, when we equate discomfort with bad and comfort with good, we're always going to keen towards the thing that doesn't help us grow. When we tear our muscles, we build our muscles. That's the whole point of bodybuilding. It's the same thing. This experience of ameliorating shame is muscle building. We have to tear and then we have to repair, and we have to be prepared to go through that. And it's nowhere near as dramatic as that sounds or feels. And this is, I guess, one of the great things of when we see people really step into looking at shame. And the antidote for shame is exposure. It's talking about it. We feel uncomfortable, but the moment we actually settle into that discomfort is the moment that we suddenly begin to feel just such a sense of relief and lightness. Zoe, if I may, can I talk about a story about shame that I really recently experienced that absolutely talked about the cave we fear to enter for me? So
I would love to hear it.
And I think it sort of illustrates viscerally what the process is. So I was meditating recently, and I had one of those moments that those of you who meditate, or those of you who are just humans, will have experienced, where you get some kind of a trigger on a show reel of some shameful moments in your life. And this one was an absolute doozy. And it was almost like, sit down, roll up, Polly, it's your whole life from childhood through now and all the shit you've done. And I was like, oh no, I'm sitting there mobilized, cross-legged, classic pose. And I was just like, oh God, I want to shut this down. And I suddenly went, no. This is it. This is the cave you fear to enter. So you sit there and get in the front row and you watch everything. And I just watched it and I watched it, and and it was like so painful, image after image of things I felt deep shame about throughout my whole life. And then I suddenly got this awareness that I was just telling myself a story about these things that had happened, and that they weren't good or bad. They were just the stories I'd attached them. And suddenly it was just like the whole thing just, and it was just gone. And the lightness and the lack of the prickling kind of horror. And it was really clear. It was like when you sit there, when you challenge the story that you tell yourself, we realize that shame is a series of stories that we've imposed. They don't come from outside, they come from us. And we have the power to just neutralize them by being with them and seeing them for what they are, a story that is no longer relevant.
I love that story, and I love that you shared it. It's the really profound but subtle skill of changing the lens. And if we don't get curious about shame, then we're not going to be able to look at our worst behavior. Because often our worst behavior it's rooted deep down in shame. And if you want to behave better and connect better and lead better, that's why you need to look at shame.
It's really true. And I guess why shame is important in the leadership context, and however you describe leadership. We look at leadership as a whole. Leadership is everything you do in your life. It's not just what you do when you're in the office or when you're in your leadership role. And so the behaviors you have which come from escaping the pain of shame are the worst behaviors you will have as a leader, as a parent, as a friend, as a lover, as a whatever. So the minute you've got a handle on, when I know that story is my shame story, and I can see the defensive behavior or the withdrawn behavior or the whatever it is, I can just be like, stop it with the stories. What's happening to the other person? And now, Zoe, you know the thing I like most in the whole world?
What?
It's hearing you talk about empathy. And this is the thing, because empathy is the antidote to shame. And it's like, this is a revelation. It's free. It's on every street corner.
It is. And look, we will have a whole other video about that, because it's worthy of that. And empathy is a skill set. Like everything that we're going to talk about, it all can be learned. And there are empathy misses. So next time we'll talk about empathy. And we'll talk about what it is to be in empathetic connection with other people, but also with yourself. But the image that is a great one is for shame is, when you open up the shame and you think, well, what the hell do I do with this now? Awareness is the first step. And then the next thing is you douse it with empathy and compassion. Yeah. And so you're not going to be left with blackened hands and blackened forearms. We promise you there's a process out of this, but you can't get the gold without true self-awareness and really looking at this. And you can't outrun this. That's what we see over and over and over again in our rooms. And people that are moving from forward, from reactivity to blame, to achievement, to perfectionism, from husband to wife to husband, more consumerism. And it's being constantly propelled because they're trying to outrun this very primal thing that if they just shifted it into the light, if they took it out of the cave and put it into the light, they'd be freed from. And this is why, in part, other than Polly's amazing jokes, we see people in our rooms weeping. We see people saying that they need to call their partner to apologize. After 25 years of marriage, one call's not going to cut it, Buster.
Or write a beautiful letter, but it's profoundly freeing. And I think that the key message that there is a cure. It's like there is an antidote. You can inoculate shame with empathy. And just to know that, and if you think about what we were saying earlier around the antecedents of shame are usually in childhood wounding. What do you do with a child that's in distress? You don't punch it in the face and leave it sitting in the corner. You pull it in. You say, it's going to be okay. You aren't, oh, you could have done better, you're judging. You're just like, I know that must really hurt. I've got you. That must really hurt, but it'll be okay because we're together. We're doing this together. That's what it is. That's what it is for you on a self-love level or a mild tolerance level, if love is too big a step. And that's what it is when you see it. And when you have, as I said, like I like to think of this as a detective. When you're a detective in your own emotions and your own responses, you'll start to see them in others. And when you see someone going into that, you can be the kindest, most empathetic, subtle human by just like, yeah, I got you. I'm with you. I'm not walking away from this. I'm standing here, often silently and gently, but lovingly. And I'm there in empathy. And it's an absolute power tool.
Absolutely. And it comes back to the question, what kind of human do you want to be? Yeah. And what kind of life do you want to lead? And I don't think anybody would answer that and say, I want to be a shallow person and I want to live fast and loose on the surface.
And I want to self-hate.
And I want to self-hate, and I want to live just boozing and drugging or numbing in any which way that I can, just binging on Netflix so that I don't have to feel or think anything.
Steady on, Zoe.
Steady on. This is, I can't possibly be talking from personal experience. It is about that, courageous leadership. And as Polly says, leadership is being the leader of yourself and bringing people with you. It's about turning and facing this stuff. And that for me is so exhilarating and so wild. And that's the warrior work. And go deep, go broad. This idea of broad thinking, broad feeling, deep knowledge, deep learning. Bring your curiosity, bring your passion, particularly to the cave you fear to enter, because there'll be the most extraordinary stuff in there. And look, if this all feels a bit scary, yeah, it kind of is. But stay with us. We're going to keep talking about skills. We're not just sort of picking off scabs and going, oh, look, it's an oozing wound. That's not what interests us. We're interested in what behaviors, what can you do to live a richer life and be a kinder person on the planet. That is particularly important to Polly and to me. So is there anything you want to say before we wrap up, Polly?
Look, you can't get to courage without vulnerability, and you cannot get to vulnerability without excavating shame. So we hammer these. We talk about these a lot, and we start all of our workshops.
I love that. Are you back to metaphors?
We start, we spend an inordinate amount of time on this because this is the foundation. Everything else is growth from there. So the key word from that, Zoe, for me is curiosity. And I also think it's really good to take sacred time with this. Think about the cave you fear to enter. It's a beautiful metaphor. I love a metaphor. But also go into your room, shut the door, turn down the lights, light a candle, sit there and enter the cave and take yourself through it. Guide yourself through it in your mind and understand what that means for you in your life and what you're missing out on by not spending that time. That little piece of excavation will save you months, years of wear and tear and anxiety and stress and not living your best life. So I hope this video has made you feel deeply uncomfortable, want to go and quickly smash a gin and tonic and eat a cream bun,
but
and
I
then go,
do that
okay,
I'm happy.
But are you ever really happy?
Can I just say, can I flag something? Because I went into a shame storm a couple of weeks ago, and it was so clear for me where I'd just done some really shitty parenting. And my parenting had come from a place of wanting to win and wanting my children to be quiet. And, valid. the latter bit, not the former, valid. But I started using power over. I was power overing with my kids. And then I realized what I was doing, and I went into a shame storm. I started to get hot. I started to feel physically sick. My heart was hurting. And what it allowed me was the moment to just go, oh, particularly look at the face of my husband. He was just very confused the moment to say, oh, I'm in shame. I'm going to remove myself for a moment because I'm not fit for human consumption. I shouldn't be talking, typing, texting, calling, certainly not parenting or engaging with my husband. So it's that classic brilliant idea, work out your own stuff so you are not working it out on other people, particularly not the people you love or the people that you work with or the people that you don't like, because that's the easiest place to shunt it all out, isn't it? You know, Joe Blow, who you think is a moron and doesn't deliver their work well. So it's a really fascinating idea, this idea of do your work, but it requires recognition of what needs to happen and then separating yourself. Because often for me, for example, shame requires me to keep talking and try to win. And that's not good, because I'm operating like this in that moment. And that's not the person that I want to be, particularly when you're engaging with, say, a 3-year-old child. But you know, that's just a theoretical example. We see
if you were to be a child of 3. It's funny though, Zoe and I we have a heartfelt, deep attempt to make short videos, but I need to add one more thing, because that really reminded me of that idea that with shame, it lodges in the body like trauma. So if you were to be in a near-death experience or to be in a car accident, all the things that happen as, you know, you see the truck hurtling towards you or the bus or whatever it is, all the things that happen in your body with that experience, they've measured scientifically, and the research shows that the same physical responses happen with shame. So if you think about shame as trauma versus thinking about shame as, oh, something I just need to get rid of and something that's bad, you will understand how it has built up in your body for however many years you've been walking around on this planet, and what the consequences of that may be, and how it might be just so deeply embedded in your behavior. And Zoe's totally right. The thing that we really need to flag is that when you are in a shame storm, the only thing you can do to get the empathy on is to remove yourself from it and just give yourself a timeout. I got to walk around the block. I've got to have a glass of water. I've just got to go to the toilet for a minute. I'll be back. Particularly if you're needing to make a crucial decision, ain't going to happen when your brain is in full trauma mode. So keep that in mind as well. These are not trivial experiences for the body. And then have a place of big, deep empathy for the amount of highly traumatized people that we're walking around with and what that looks like in society. And I think you'll get a picture of why people, you know, live the way they live and do the things they do, including us. So we're all in the shame spiral together. And this is the work that is going to help us collectively as a community start to unwind ourselves into a place of kindness and empathy.
Absolutely. And just to throw a light on that last statement, because it's so important, you can't help other people unless you're aware of what's going on in yourself. So unless you've done deep inquiry around vulnerability and shame for yourself, you're not going to be able to be in connection and service with other people. So that's something to think about. We can't see you, which might seem strange because we feel like we can and we're looking at you. But Polly and I do want to say, if any of you have been upset or triggered by this conversation today, we really encourage you to seek out someone for support. And if you don't have anyone that's available to you, a friend or a counsellor that's available, please contact us on our website and we will do our best to try and direct you to someone in your town or your state. Because we also, as much as we love to rumpus in this space and we try to present this information as joyfully as possible, and that might sound like a paradox, we're also aware that this can be very, very painful and frightening work for some people. So if you're sitting on your own somewhere and you're feeling scared, Polly and I feel you. Contact us, contact someone, and take care of yourself. And then come back for our next session, which is going to be on empathy, which is going to deliver you some lighter joy and some tools to dig your way out of this. Okay, and I've just realized, as a complete aside, so you have the attention span of a gnat, my shoulders on this chair look massive.
Oh, I thought that was just you. I thought you'd been doing the muscle tearing bodybuilding. to get yourself out of shame. Everything that Zoe said, and we'll put up some numbers for Lifeline and Beyond Blue for if stuff is getting you down. Those guys do amazing work. You do amazing work. Thank you for joining us in our video on shame, and we look forward to welcoming you in with open arms to a big, fat, juicy session on empathy coming soon.
Bye-bye. Good work, people.